Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to another weekly presentation of the United States Spiritist Federation of the Saturday Talks, always at 11 a.m. Today, we are very happy to have here with us Humberto Schubert. Morning, Humberto. How are you?
Very good morning. I'm quite fine, thanks. And how about you?
All good here, thank you. So before Humberto starts, let me introduce him formally. Humberto Schubert is a lecturer in philosophy and a former academic visitor at the University of Oxford. He's also a volunteer in the Spiritist Society Primavera, Brazil, editor of the Primavera Spiritualist Press, and author of books and articles on Spiritism, theology, and philosophy. Today, he will be talking to us on the subject, the future of religion. Humberto, it's with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm very honored with this invitation. And I hope this title is not too pretentious. I'm actually not trying to predict the future of religion, but to inform you about some major trends in world religions and in the religious practices nowadays. Um, of course, when we are dealing with statistics, for example, or when we are trying to read and interpret the current situation, it is quite possible that a major change in these trends will ultimately lead the development of a social process to a completely different way. And we have to be aware to this possibility. The future is open. Thanks God for that, because that means we are not determined and free to choose whatever sort of life and future it could seem better to us. Well, I will present this slides because I planned it to be as much intuitive as possible, and also they are very compact. The essential information of my talk is there, but I hope it is not too compact to make it confuse. So first thing we have to consider is that we have different religious conceptions about their own future. So religions have an opinion, obviously, about their own future. And usually, when we are dealing with religions, these conceptions, they have something to do with revelation. So in Buddhism, for example, the future is more or less predictable in the sense that people have to enlighten themselves. They have to follow the Buddhist path to enlightenment, and we can conceive a picture of the world when the majority of the population, or when maybe all the human population, will be on the way to enlightenment. Of course, because of the concept of nirvana itself, it's impossible to predict precisely how the world will be if people are enlightened, if this world will exist at all. But we can have a very good idea of what the world would be when people are on the way to enlightenment. And that's valid for most religions, for Islam, or to Judaism, or to Christianity, because if we think about the ultimate salvation or liberation or enlightenment of the human species, it is hard to exactly tell how things are going to be, because that's veiled with metaphor in the word religions. There are several layers, actually, of metaphors and symbols, and we cannot precisely say and tell what is the kingdom of God, what exactly is the reign of God, or what exactly is nirvana, for example. But when we are just one step before, or one degree before, and not talking about the ultimate salvation, but the process of Christianization of the whole population, or so to say, the process of acceptance of the religious message, then we can predict more or less how people are to behave, how they are expected to behave in such a circumstance. On the other hand, it is also interesting to check the scientific data of religion studies, theology itself, social quantitative research, and even nowadays we have health research connected or associated to religions. And through this scientific information, we can know a lot about how religions impact our lives in a very, very objective way, because we're talking about scientific research and not about the religious positions or interpretations about their own future. So we have a major trend in the West, particularly, which is the death of God, the idea of a sunset of religion and religious idols and religious values. And that's a very specific Christian tendency. So we have to be aware that most authors, the majority of the authors that preach the death of God, they come from a Christian background. And that's very telling. That's very relevant, because it is in the nature of Judeo-Christian, and also in the nature of Greek conceptions of the word, that self-criticism and some degree of rebellion, of revolt against tradition is expected. And in Greek tradition, actually, we have a fast substitution of religion for philosophy, a couple centuries before the birth of Jesus Christ. And in Judeo-Christian tradition, we also have a sort of self-criticism or a rebellion against tradition, against the source or the previous generation or so. If we think about John Baptist and about Jesus himself and about Paul, the Apostle Paul, then we will have a very exact picture of how Judeo-Christian tradition, and especially Christian tradition, criticize itself in a very systematic way. It is in some sense, it is essentially self-criticism. It is self-analysis that leads to a revisionism of behavior, of beliefs. And Jesus is very frequently preaching against old interpretations of the law, old behavioral patterns and ideas that could be less spiritual than they are meant to be. And most of his work, or a significant part of his work, is reinterpreting the tradition and the law of Moses and of the other prophets, in a sense that enlightens the spiritual core or the spiritual meaning of these teachings of the past. So another important trend now is the right to self-determination. Because of Enlightenment and all the Enlightenment culture in the West, there was for a couple centuries or 1.5 century a tendency to fight religion as obsolete or as harmful or as a piece of the past, an artifact for the museum, but not something that should influence contemporary lives and should not play a major role in the present. And we have many political reasons and social reasons for that occurrence, for that thought in Enlightenment 250, 200 years ago. But in the last 80 years or so, we have recurrent criticism of this idea as already obsolete too. So enlightenment now is in the past, or lays in the past, while religions are more and more advocating their right to explain themselves, to present themselves in their own terms, and not through the lens of lay and secular society, which is pretty reasonable, because no one wants to be depicted by his enemies, by her enemies and detractors. So to some extent, the right to self present itself is a logical process that we should grant all religious groups. Well, another major problem in current interpretations of religion is the idea that revelation is opposed to the scientific worldview. And rationally, we should not believe this dogma that religion and science do not come along, but we have to question it and actually ask how precisely, or in which aspects, religion and science are in contradiction or in an opposition, and in which aspects they are not in opposition and they actually cooperate with each other. So for a more rational analysis of the current situation, we have to avoid the very modern myth of a permanent conflict and contradiction between science and religion. But we have to acknowledge also that to some extent and in some aspects, there is a conflict. There is moments when religious communities deny science, which is unreasonable. It is something that we cannot justify, because science is the best method to obtain knowledge, to acquire knowledge. And at the same time, science is not the ultimate word about anything, about absolutely everything, because the scientific method is very carefully projected to scrutinize the physical world, the empirical world. And it doesn't tell us anything about morality or about our existence and the meaning of life, or about religious experiences. Of course, science can associate religions and philosophies or art to some physical aspects that could be observed and scrutinized through the scientific method, but it does not mean that we could reduce these dimensions of life, such as art and religion, or politics, or moral life, or existential concerns, to the scientific method. And when it happens, it leads to a very, very wrong and twisted conclusion about the ultimate meaning of human life, one that we should never stimulate or emphasize. Now, there is recent research on the impact of spirituality or religiosity on health and well-being. Nowadays, we have more and more research on well-being, separated from research in health, and to mention just some of these recent research projects, we can mention the very, very strong correlation between happiness, well-being, and spirituality. So we have very, very consistent research showing that well-being and happiness coefficients, they're directly associated with spirituality and a religious life. We have a very consistent research, especially from Harvard, showing that religion and spirituality is a major predictor of overall health and mortality. And it is also associated with less mental disorder and far less suicide rates. Finally, there is another problem that does not concern science, but it is an internal problem between religions, which is the conflict between religious groups still nowadays, after so many hundreds of years and thousands of years of disagreement. And in order to move forward from that point, we have to learn from the sages, the spiritual masters, the philosophers that managed to create a more tolerant environment inside religions and in religious discourse itself. So next one, please. Okay, thank you. Well, it is very frequent nowadays, especially in the media, in the not so informed media, not so scientifically informed media, the idea that the unaffiliated group would be the largest in the future. And that basically happens because it is a strong trend in Europe, in Western Europe, and in North America, which are important cultural hubs and to some extent still the center of the world culture, the cultural leaders in the world. Okay, but these countries have progressively a smaller impact on the world culture due to the diminishment, the reduction of their population. So if we see the populational growth in Africa and Asia, and also the economic growth in Africa, Asia, or Latin America, we can predict that these continents will play a larger cultural role in the next decades, in a few decades from now. So what is a tendency in Europe and USA, for example, or Canada, is not necessarily the world tendency in 20 years from now. So that's a tricky question, therefore, because the non-religious or unaffiliated tendency, this tendency has both advantages and disadvantages, and it is also more prevalent in Western society or in North Atlantic Western society. It is not the absolute trend in Brazil or in Hispanic America, for example, and absolutely not in Africa, which is a continent that will play a greater role in world culture and in world society in the next 20 or 30 decades. So, but the unaffiliated group has some powerful advantages, such as leading society or leading society to a more liberal and syncretic perspective. So the notion that we can respect and consider the truths of many different religions is one of the major advantages of the unaffiliated group. It is, on the other hand, less helpful as a predictor of good health and good mental health than formal religions and religions with a clear doctrine that influence and impact your moral life, for example, in a more objective way. And sometimes it is also morally loose. So the unaffiliated group is very diverse, and some people do follow a moral code, or they agree with, let's say, to mention Christianity as a big example, but not restricted to it. So people could follow the Ten Commandments, or the Golden Rule, or the idea to love the neighbors, and that is a powerful predictor of good mental health and a better life. But in the unaffiliated group, there are also people that do not agree with that, and they do not follow any specific moral rule, and they have a more relativistic view of the world, which includes saying, for example, that there is no good or evil. And if there is one belief that is extremely harmful for society, for the individual life, is the belief that there is no good or evil, that basically destroys the possibility of an ethical life and of a moral development of the self. We have one revolutionary research by Van der Wiel and his team that shows that service attendance and formal temples, formal religious service attendance, like a mass or a meeting at the mosque or the synagogue, is more beneficial for especially mental health, but also to physical health. Like, it's quite impressive research, actually, because they found correlations between cardiac health and overall mortality and service attendance, showing that people who are committed to the practical and objective transformation of life and to follow a specific code of conduct, they are more likely to have a better health, and in a significant proportion, not in a irrelevant proportion. And finally, again, the number of unaffiliated or non-religious people is not growing fast enough worldwide. It is growing in Brazil, for example. I'm talking from Brazil, but it is not growing faster than the growth of the evangelical group in Brazil. And that's not exactly the case of other countries, but in other countries as well, we can see that sometimes here and there, Islam is growing faster than the unaffiliated group, or another branch, another religion is growing faster than the unaffiliated group. So to the next one. Well, following Benjamin Constant de Rebecque, one of the most important philosophers in the turn from the 18th to the 19th century, also an enlightened philosopher, an Enlightenment philosopher, and a political liberal. In his very famous book, Principles of Politics Applicable to All Governments, say that freedom always leads to diversity, and diversity always leads to competition. So when we see the metropoles of the modern world, we see a healthy competition between restaurants, for example. The cuisine of many different countries and many different perspectives about food, about the way to cook, about how to cook food, promotes a more intense competition that ultimately selects, in a Darwinian perspective or in an economic or market perspective, select and emphasize the best candidates, the preferred candidates. And that also happens with news, with knowledge, with religions. So in a very liberal way, he said that the struggle between religious ideas and beliefs will ultimately improve them, ultimately select the best beliefs and the best ideas, because people could compare the practical results, the practical outcomes of different religious perspectives, and choose their religious affiliation based on this rational analysis. Now, nowadays, 200 years after this moment, we can see that it is slightly naive, and people will not behave like enlightened philosophers all the time, and they will keep their beliefs and ideas even when possibly better ideas and beliefs are available. But at the same time, it's also right to some extent, and it's something that we can see in modern society. People changing their religious affiliation based on their perception. This perception could be wrong or right. I don't know. Yeah? It's not relevant for the argument, but based on their perception that this or that religion is better for them, or contains more truth, or is closer to the truth than their previous religions. Next one. Now, maybe you could open all the arguments, because I don't have direct control of them. Yes. A research done in Brazil very recently shows that in the editorial market, only the religious segment grew, while all the other segments, maybe due to the pandemic, to COVID, they fell. So the only segment to grow in the last 6 years or 7 years or so in Brazil, which is not a great market for books, unfortunately, but the only segment that actually grew was the religious one. And that tells something about society, about what society is looking for now. In 2019, biggest newspapers in Brazil, they published a research indicating that religious books are preferred by young people. And they are still growing between the youth and between this younger generation. So again, I don't like futurology, and I'm not trying to prophesize anything, but these numbers, they tell us something about these current tendencies and how society may be in the next 20 years or so. So to the graphics now. Well, that was not marked by me. It was marked by the original person that posted the chart. But it shows that unaffiliated group, especially not in America, I think in the world, yeah, in the world, the unaffiliated group is the one that makes significant conversions, while the group of Christians is the one that is losing more people to conversions. But this is a very tricky info, because this usually lead people, and in many newspapers it has been leading people to conclude that the unaffiliated group is the only growing group, while Christianity, for example, or Buddhism are losing believers. But this chart ignores the growing number of religious affiliation due to birth, and it is actually a factor that is like 5 or 10 times more relevant than conversions. So in some religious groups, the number are raising very fast because of the rates of birth in these groups, like in Islam, for example, very, very clearly. So next one. Yeah, here we have the actual prediction of how the world religions will be in 30 years or 25 years from now. And we see that Christianity, or the Christians, are growing, and Muslims are growing twice as fast. And some groups that, from a Western perspective, may seem dominant or may be interpreted as growing very fast, like the unaffiliated group, are actually not growing so fast, because while they make conversions, especially from Christianity, sometimes from Buddhism or Judaism, or also Hinduism, and in a smaller proportion also from Islam. But this group, the unaffiliated group, has a very, very low rate of birth, and also larger suicide rates. So it is not a community that we could expect to be a major player in the next 20 years. Next one. Well, when you see the historical evolution of religions, they come from a more restricted area or restricted perspective, and also from a more materialistic view of religion to a more universal and spiritualistic perspective on religion. And that's a very obvious tendency in religions, to the point that many intellectuals, many academics interpreted that as the essential truth about religions. So in all places, everywhere, religion started with shamanism. I mean, literally every culture. And shamanism has some very specific traits, like it is animistic. That is, everything spiritualized, everything is seen as alive, as divine, or as magical. People behave as everything had spiritual meaning, so they will take plants, animals, rocks, rivers very seriously. The earth itself, the wind itself, the clouds, the sun, the stars, everything is important, everything is meaningful. And although we see it as primitive now, and of course, to some extent, it is more primitive and less sophisticated than modern religions, there is a great beauty and also a more direct connection with nature, with earth, with life forms, and with living beings. And also it has the advantage of taking literally everything and every phenomena as very serious. Now we move from shamanism to tribal creeds, to tribal and ritualized religions, usually in smaller communities and then in larger communities with the advance of time. And these tribal creeds, or these ethnic religions, they reflect more formal notions and a more ethical approach to life. And they are, because of that, therefore, they are closely connected to politics, to the political authority, to the law, and to the attempt to structure and organize society in the birth of civilization. And then as the smaller communities are swallowed by empires, or they become with time transnational larger human groups, they have to adapt to more rational conceptions, still political, like in Rome. The emperor is divine, is a representation of Jupiter himself. And that's the same in the Persian Empire, in China. The emperor, pretty much in all big empires, is seen as enthroned by heaven or enthroned by God himself. But more and more, these ideas, they are moving to a more spiritual conception. So following the next one. Now, that's a very interesting, very beautiful thought. The basis for the perennial philosophy, which is a branch of philosophy that advocates the universality of conceptions, that reason is equal in every human being, and therefore we usually think about nature and reality and human life and liberty and consciousness more or less the same way. And this idea also corresponds to the notion of an axial age, which is a notion coined by the philosopher and psychiatrist Karl Jaspers, the founder of psychopathology, so a very important psychiatrist in the history of psychiatry, and also a very important philosopher. He was the founder of existentialism, very important movement of 20th century philosophy. And he said basically that spiritual revolutions happened simultaneously in all ancient civilizations at the same time. Maybe a bit before in Egypt, because Egypt is a very, very old civilization, maybe also a bit before in Babylon and India than in China or Greece. But all of them, and these are basically all civilizations in the past, okay, in antiquity, in all of them, a revolution criticized rituals and offered a sort of reformation based on a more spiritual perspective. That's a very, very powerful fact of the ancient civilizations, of the evolution of societies in ancient civilizations, because it tells us that communities that did not communicate with each other, they moved from ethnic and local perspectives to a very metaphysical, spiritual, and universal perspective. Let's see exactly how or what all these religions preached. Next one, please. Well, they all criticized rituals and material aspects of religions. You can see, for example, Buddha is a reformer, the prophet Daniel or Jeremiah in Judaism, or the Greek philosophers very clearly. Also before of them, Zoroaster in Persia. The notion of immortality of the soul and reward and punishment that emerged in Babylon, in Mesopotamia. The idea of internal virtues and principles that are higher because they are eternal. They are higher and more essential than casual or local virtues or local values or moral codes. That's also very prevalent in all spiritual awakenings in this age in many different cultures. The notions of individual responsibility and conscientiousness, and the idea that I'm accounted for what I do in a very deep level, in a very psychological and spiritual, moral level, not only in exterior behavior, because the older religions or the more ancient religions, they had very specific codes of behavior emphasizing what you do in a practical sense, what you do physically, so to say. And suddenly you have in China Confucius and Lao Tzu, in India Buddha and others, and then Patanjali, and also in Judaism and in Babylon, in Greece, you have people questioning the physicality of these moral codes and emphasizing instead of that the more internal aspect of moral decisions and moral life, like your intentions, for example, your will. And then the idea of absolute or God or the ultimate reality, and the idea that this reality is ineffable. So we can talk about it, but only metaphorically, symbolically. We cannot actually grasp the infinite. And this is always this reality, or this God, the supreme being, is not like a person that we could know and define, like a physical anthropomorphical God, like the Greek gods, the mythological gods. But this ultimate reality is universal and is more complex than we can conceive it. And our idols and projections are nothing but illusions to serve us as palliative to our miseries. So we invent gods, we create gods to our image, instead of understanding that reality and the complexity of nature, the complexity of human beings and human consciousness is a reflection of this supreme reality. So next one. After this axial age, so after 500 before Christ, we have completely universal religions that are meant to include all human beings, sometimes all life forms. We could mention as examples Christianity and Islam. They are not folk religions. They are not ethnic religions for people who are born in a specific area or from a specific family. They are not attached to any specific cultural group, but they are meant to be preached, to be brought to everyone. So there is also a militant character in these religions, because they are meant to be brought to everyone. You are supposed to preach the news if you are a believer, a follower of these religions. Well, they are also more ethical, and ethical in a more spiritual sense instead of a more physical sense. They all preach that this life is a small chapter in the cosmic drama. So after this life, you have to live the next chapters of your development, and possibly the best ones, the best chapters of your development, of your life, will be played after this physical life, this very limited physical life. The idea that prejudice and human divisions are a trace of animality, of inferiority, a limitation that prevents you from having the true spiritual, which is the universal perspective. Everyone is divine, everyone is a child of God, and so on. And the idea that the purpose of life is or includes overcoming ignorance and egoism. So next one. And we can mention as one powerful example the Akhenaton revolution. Akhenaton was a pharaoh, an Egyptian pharaoh and priest that reformed the mythology and the anthropomorphic cult into a very universalistic religion, very similar to all new religions that I just mentioned. And here is one of the most prevalent images associated to Akhenaton: the idea that the sun is the image of God or the face of God, and that every ray of sun is like a hand. If you can see, maybe it's too small, but this little hands, these tiny hands in the ends of the sun rays, they represent the action of God, the actuality of God and the presence of God everywhere, because the sons of ray, they reach everywhere, and they make no distinction. That's very important. No distinction between poor and rich, good or bad, and they take care of everyone. Next one. In the next image, we can clearly see that the sun rays are taking care of everything, different aspects of life. In other images, we see that some of these sun rays, they carry something from the God to earth. But in this one, we are seeing that it's like gently carrying of everything, basically. In the next image, we can see that there is no distinction between more and less important people. They will be all reached by God, and even the plants and the objects, actually, they are taken care by God. So in the next slide, we'll see the most powerful rational and universal argument in Greek philosophy by the not very famous Xenophanes, who said, well, the Ethiopians, they represent their gods as black. The Thracians, which is more or less in Romania nowadays, they represent their gods as blonde. The Persians represent their gods with long beards and with Persian appearance. So if cattle had gods, they would look like cattle. And if the lions had gods, they would look like lions. So that sounds like a very aggressive criticism against religion. And to some extent, he's saying that religion is invented, is a product of human imagination, representation, and philosophical conception. But he's not mocking religion. That's the wrong conclusion. And we should not follow that path. Xenophanes is a very religious man. He's actually telling us to distrust or to have a suspicion about very exact pictures of the gods, or the pretentious representation of the gods as they are. And he reminds us to consider that representations as metaphorical, and to look for a more abstract concept that should make justice to God's universality. So in the next generation, we see Socrates and Plato in many different books talking about the idea that honoring the gods should be equated with a full spiritual life. And that includes the investigation of oneself, the pursuit of virtue, the growth in wisdom and knowledge, and the love of beautiful and good things, and actually also from beauty and good in themselves. The expression in themselves is very typical of Plato, and it's associated with idealism, which is not fully understood by most people who try to interpret that, but it essentially tells us that these virtues and these principles, they are superior to our finite existence, and they are superior because of their universality, because of their divinity, so to say. So in the next one, because I have very little time now, we have Aristotle, one of the greatest philosophers, maybe the greatest mind intellect in all human history. For many, the most intelligent person that ever lived, creator of many sciences, including logic and biology, so two very important sciences. And Aristotle say that the cosmos is clearly organized, everything is in its place, every phenomena, every being, and the totality of phenomena work in such a way that causes admiration to the intellect. So even the atheist scientists usually use these expressions. Now, I do not believe in God, but the universe is beautiful, and it is beautiful in an intellectual way. So it is logically beautiful. It is mathematically beautiful, and it is beautiful in the sense of proportion that nearly everything seems to have and to manifest. And Aristotle, being not a priest and being a philosopher, grasped this characteristic of many scientists and intellectuals as a religious admiration for the world, for nature. He also said nothing is logical without purpose. And that's a very incorrect belief of modern scientists sometimes, because they do not study philosophy, and they believe that things can be logical or organized without having a purpose. But logic is subordinated to purpose. We organize things because we want a clear and a good-looking room, for example. And my room will not organize itself for no specific reason. And then he concluded that intelligence is the intentional organization of things and of processes. So there is no such thing as casual or accidental organization. That's insane, that's illogical. And if the cosmos is logical, meaningful, and makes sense through and through, it's because it follows goals and ends. So the cosmos is a reflection of a supreme intelligence. Now, I think we will stop with this slide here to have questions and answers. At the birth of modern science, a very wrong and actually a misconception about the historical birth of modern science is that it was a split from religions, while in fact it is a product of the clergy and of organized religion, specifically of Christian religion. Like the Roman Church, for example, founded the first universities, not some of them, but all of them, in Padua, in Oxford, in Cambridge, in Heidelberg, in Paris. And in the Reformation, because of the Reformation, the debates only intensified in these religious-only universities for the first 400 years or 500 years, for basically half the existence or more than half the existence of universities. They were fully religious and religious institutions. And then the printing press made by Gutenberg wasn't created for any other purpose than printing the Bible. It was also used for other purposes, but the main purpose was to print the Bible. And the creators of science, the founders of science, they were extremely religious scientists and philosophers, people who were not accidentally or a bit religious, but they were more religious. Most of them were more religious than we are now. And if people study carefully the lives of Copernicus, Galileo, or Descartes and Bacon, or Newton, or Robert Boyle, or Kepler, or Faraday, or Immanuel Kant, they will find that in some fragments they seem to be almost fanatical. They're very, very, very committed religious people. So I think I will finish with that slide and invite you to consider that we do not have a settled or a definite picture of how religions are going to be. But I like the sentence of the Spiritist author Léon Denis, who says that Spiritism is not a new religion in the market, in the competition against other religions in a sectarian sense. And it has actually no intention or no pretension of being a competitor in this market. But in its philosophical aspect, it is the tendency or the future or the predictable future maybe of all religions, since they are already moving in the direction of progressive universalization. And we can expect that more liberal and more universal and more spiritualistic forms of religion will emerge in the next centuries. Thank you very much. I hope it was informative.
Thank you very much, Humberto, for the insights and reflections you provided us today. Please stay with us for the Q&A session that will start shortly after just a few announcements. Please register today with the 13th Spiritist Federation of Florida Conference and join us for an inspiring event where we explore the relevance of Jesus in our modern world. This in-person gathering will be held this year in Apopka, Florida on April 6th and 7th. English interpretation will be provided. There is a new virtual course, Introduction to Mediumship. It is a free virtual course for beginners. The U.S. Spiritist Federation is thrilled to invite individuals eager to explore the realm of spirit communication according to Spiritism. Check out the new course at https://learn.spiritist.us or scan the QR code on the flyer. There is the podcast-like series, Psychology and Spirituality, A Bridge to a Better Life, based on the works by Joanna J. Angelis. A new episode appears every Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. It is available on YouTube and Spotify. There is the Spiritist app, Be My Hope, which is available now on the App Store or Google Play. This app offers uplifting content in a collection of videos, daily messages, and audio materials. Download it now. And on the screen, please note there is a QR code. If you want to help the USSF produce more publications and promote Spiritism to everyone, scan the QR code on screen for your donation. Let's start now addressing the comments or questions from the audience. There is still time to send yours. From the TVCEI International Spiritist Council, should we identify as Spiritists or Spiritist Christians?
Well, is it a divide? I think we have, to some extent, the liberty to prefer the denomination of Spiritist or Spiritist Christians. But I do not think that as a philosophy, Spiritists are compelled to define themselves as Christians, because Christianity, according to Spiritism, is interpreted on the light of this free and rational evaluation of life, this rational questioning and the overall perspective and worldview that follows from it. So, of course, Christian values are essential to Spiritism, and even the figure of Jesus is essential as models, as examples of how ethical people should be and in which direction they should progress or evolve. But if we think about Spiritism as an organized religion, we are also to some extent missing the point of Kardec's revolutionary approach to spirituality and to religiosity, which was very syncretic, very universalistic, ecumenic, and emphasized the free and active pursuit of happiness, spiritual growth, and knowledge in a very undogmatic way, which is not comparable to, in my opinion, not comparable to any religious tradition or any religious doctrine.
Thank you very much for that, Humberto. So our next comment is from Gabriel Ignacio. I think Muslims grow because of the number of births, and Christians at the most Pentecostals because they promise instant healing and miracles.
Well, yes, religions have different appeals. Some religions may seem more attractive, for example, to people in crisis, while others may maybe seem as repellent exactly for the same reason. So in some religious groups, we see more competence in having and raising children and keeping the faith alive in these children, while in other groups, the emphasis is more on the liberal conversion of people, and there is some disregard or some smaller or diminished interest in keeping people in the boundaries of the faith, so to say. And of course, all these decisions, all these principles, values, or perspectives, they will have profound social impact in how these religions will behave and manifest in the practical world, in the public.
Thank you, Humberto. So we have a question from the United States Spiritist Federation. What do you think attracts or drives away people to and from religions nowadays?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, I think that is a match or many possible matches between individual concerns and what religions are offering. For some people, what a group is offering may be attractive, while for other people, exactly the same characteristics may be repellent. So it is very difficult to predict what religion will be adequate for a person. And we also have to remember that the idea of attracting or driving or pushing people to or away from religion is a very modern idea. So some groups will resist this idea and say, well, there is actually no such option. You should not be attracted or driven to religion. You were born in a religion, you just keep there and follow. So because we are very modern, we already have this concept of a possible transition from one religion to the other, but it seems restricted to pockets of Western society and also Eastern but Westernized societies like Japan or other modern countries. So we are not already in the position to judge if it will be ultimately be seen as a virtue in the future, or as it sometimes seems to be the case, if this liberal perspective will disappear or will be less and less prevalent in the future. because some trends in the progress of religion in society nowadays, they allow us to predict a different scenario, maybe a more traditionalist scenario. Well, I am myself a liberal. I am a proud follower of the Western tradition of liberal, free, and rational interpretation of everything. It doesn't mean that Western society is better in all its aspects and characteristics. It's clearly not. But in this sense, I think we have much to learn with this virtue, with the best that this society could create. And therefore, I think that we should strive and we should fight actually for a more ecumenic, universal, and liberal perspective about religion.
Thank you for that, Humberto. From Yasko Adakava. Hi, Humberto. Interesting collection of data. I wonder how tight is the relationship between the unaffiliation to any religious denomination and the degree of spirituality, belief in God or other higher power. Did I understand correctly that among this group, there are more suicides, perhaps more loneliness, small or no family?
Yes, you interpreted correctly the data. Unfortunately, there is a direct connection between the lack of intrinsic and concrete spirituality and this morbid outcomes. But it's not the case of all unaffiliated. This is a very large and very diverse group, and it includes people who are, for example, not in a diminishing way, not in a pejorative way. They are spiritual tourists. They migrate from one to the other experiences, but sometimes very intensely, very committed to it at the moment. And the amount of people who are actually atheists or against any form of spirituality in the unaffiliated group varies from country to country. So in Brazil, and I'm more familiar with the data here in Brazil, this group is very, very small inside the unaffiliated. So most unaffiliated believe in God or a higher power, but they don't want to be committed with a formal religion. And therefore, they present a higher level of spirituality than unaffiliated groups in Europe, for example. In Europe, I know that there is a significant difference between unaffiliated in Eastern Europe and Western Europe. It culturally means something completely different, and it changed the way people actually behave and their perspectives about the world, about human life. There is also interesting data from China that's very tricky. That should not warns us not to come to the conclusion that unaffiliated are atheists or they don't have any religion, because when asked about religion, about the word religion, about 90% of Chinese say they have none. They are non-religious. They're not religious people. When asked about materialism, like the political Marxist materialism, most people will also say that they are materialists. They do not believe in anything religious. At the same time, about 70% of Chinese believe their marriages are planned in heaven before reincarnation. So that's a very strange sort of materialism. That's a very peculiar form of materialism. And it can be very tricky to actually decode the different levels of information that social research gives us. There is also a research showing that 50%, about 50 to 55% of all Chinese, which is a huge number, believe in spirits and the possibility of contact with deceased person, with spirits of the deceased. And that's a massive number. But when asked about religious convictions or spirituality, most Chinese will deny that they have any spirituality. That's just one example that it can vary a lot from country to country.
Yeah, very thought-provoking. Thank you, Alberto. We have a question from the TVCEI International Spiritist Council. Can we prevent politics from invading Spiritism, keeping it focused on the works of Allan Kardec?
Well, that's very difficult to prevent because politics is possibly the preferred human activity nowadays, the central human concern. At times, in the progress of civilization, it is art or philosophy or religion itself or other forms of human experience. But politics now is very at the center of human life, of social debate, and therefore it is inevitable that it will exert some influence over Spiritism. But as long as Spiritism is a more fundamental concern about reality and about human life, it should not be ruled by politics in the sense that we sometimes see as a subordinate or something to be molded by politics or political ideologies. Exactly because politics is never fundamental. It is a concern about practical life and actually about the specific layer of practical life, which is the collective practical life and how we interact with others in that level. So to ask about what is the universe, what is life, what is human consciousness, will always be more fundamental than politics. And therefore, there is a logical primacy of philosophy, like Spiritism and other philosophical models, to consequential thoughts such as political thoughts.
Thank you.
And sorry, yes, the works of Allan Kardec are essential. And not only the works, because we don't want fundamentalist interpretations of Kardec and repetitions of Kardec sentences and fragments and teachings, but we want to learn to think like Kardec and to apply the Spiritist lens to everything like he did.
Very good. Thank you, Humberto. And we have a question from the U.S. Spiritist Federation. How do we explain the spirits part of Spiritism to others when asked?
That's interesting because research shows, as I just mentioned, the research about China, so the country that that lives under very heavy indoctrination against religion for 100 years and religious persecution, actually. So if in that country about 50% of the population still believe in spirits of the deceased, that means that it should not be such a weird concept. And if we watch horror movies, for example, we'll see that the majority of population is at least familiar with the concept of ghosts and spirits of the dead. They may have beliefs and ideas associated to that concept, including the idea that these things do not exist and so on. But the concept is very rooted in the core of human experience. It's not something that beings are not familiar with. So I think we should approach this concept in the more naturalistic way as possible, and just to mention to people that, well, pretty much every culture believes that. We have scientific research revealing this, that there is no culture that did not conceive the idea of spirits of the dead, and that these spirits have a full life and may communicate with us through dreams or in apparitions or in intuition. And the fact that is very transcultural, very pervasive across cultures in all human communities, this tells us something about the naturality of these conceptions, that they are not invented and they are not culturally dependent. They are not Christian or Muslim. They are not Hindu. They are human. In all communities, we will spot the same conceptions.
Thank you very much, Alberto, and many thanks to everyone who watched today's talk live and those who have been following our weekly Spiritist Talk series. Don't miss our next live next Saturday, March 30th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, when Gustavo Silveira will be speaking about Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Humberto, before we close the live today, would you please offer a prayer?
Yes. Let us move our hearts with greater intensity possible to us, to the source of being, to this ultimate reality that we should adore if we were centered and fully aware of ourselves, of our own nature. Let us be grateful and be disposed to act according to the universal flow of good, wisdom, and justice that is always struggling to reach and to actually enrich this universe, this world that we live in. Amen. So be it.